Hi there, 8th graders. This is History, Chapter 19, Section 2, Moving Closer to War. This is Part 1. I'll be reading 583 to 586. Do follow along. Main idea: as Europe once again plunged into war, Americans debated whether the U.S. should become involved. We're going to be reading about Germany's military conquest of Europe during the late 1930s and early 1940s, and the steps in which the Roosevelt administration increased American support to the Allies and the effects that these steps had. The most outspoken isolationists in Congress were progressive Republicans, mainly from the Midwest and the West. Their primary support came from a number of newspapers, most notably those in the William Randolph Hearst chain. On the radio, Roosevelt's New Deal critic, Father Charles Coughlin, also lined up with the isolationists. An America First committee sponsored rallies around the country against the war. A frequent speaker was the popular pilot Charles Lindbergh, who warned that the only way our American life and ideals can be preserved is by staying out of this war. The Internationalists were strongest in the Democratic Party and generally represented the states in the South and the Northeast. They looked to President Roosevelt for leadership. Europe at war again. As Churchill had predicted, the Munich Agreement failed to appease Hitler, who in March of 1939 swallowed up the rest of Czechoslovakia and demanded territory in Poland. Britain and France pledged to defend Poland from Hitler, and they asked the Soviet Union to join in an alliance to contain Germany. In August 1939, however, Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin signed a non-aggression pact with Germany. By removing the threat of war on two fronts, the pact cleared the way for Hitler to invade Poland. Hitler still doubted that Britain and France could resist him, however. The outbreak of war. Before dawn, on September 1st, 1939, German forces crossed into Poland in an attack so fast and so brutal that a new word was coined, Blitzkrieg, meaning lightning war. This time, Britain and France decided to fight, and on September 3rd, they declared war on Germany. President Roosevelt declared that the U.S. would remain neutral, but he added, even a neutral cannot be asked to close his mind or his conscience. Within weeks, he asked Congress to lift the Neutrality Act's arms embargo that prevented Britain and France from buying American weapons. Although Congress was flooded with telegrams urging it to keep America out of the blood business, after weeks of debate, it agreed to sell arms to the Allies if they paid cash and carried the goods in their own ships. Near disaster at Dunkirk. After a lull in the fighting over the winter of 1939-1940, Hitler launched an invasion of Norway and Denmark. Next, the German army swept into the Netherlands and Belgium, where for the first time they met resistance from British and French troops. In May 1940, German forces defeated the Allied army and drove it into the sea at the French town of Dunkirk on the Belgian border. Cut off from retreat by land, the army was saved when 300,000 British and French troops were evacuated across the English Channel in a heroic 9-day rescue effort, aided by 600 private boats. That would be something really interesting to read more about Dunkirk. Battle of Britain. In June 1940, Italy invaded France and declared war on Great Britain. In response, President Roosevelt announced that although the United States would not enter the war, it would extend as much aid as possible to the democracies. On June 22nd, France surrendered, and Britain faced the threat alone. As the German Air Force bombed British airfields, factories, and cities to prepare the way for German armies to cross the English Channel, British found leadership in its new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. Offering only blood, toil, tears, and sweat, he pledged, "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight on the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender until in God's time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and liberation of the old." Who's he talking to there? Who's the new world that he's calling upon to help the old? He's calling to the United States. We need your help. Help us, please. America abandons neutrality. Prime Minister Churchill asked the United States for a loan of 50 destroyers to protect British shipping from German submarines. Recognizing that the isolationists in Congress would block approval of the loan, Roosevelt decided to act on his own. In September of 1940, by executive order, he transferred 50 old World War I destroyers to Britain in return for the use of bases in Newfoundland and the Caribbean. Meanwhile, for months, London suffered bombing day and night by hundreds of German planes. The fighter pilots of the Royal Air Force, however, kept the Germans from gaining control of the skies over Britain and forced Hitler to abandon his invasion plans. Never in the field of human conflict, said Churchill, was so much owed by so many to so few. This ends part 1 of section 2.